Well, good morning. I was sitting in the back listening to the remarks that Senator Senjum said, and so it's hard not to just start in responding to that. But I won't for now. I'll take a step back and just review the week. And the week was very tough. But I think you have to step back and take a look at the 2 weeks. And being in the Senate, it has been pretty tough. I think, last week when Senator Bach was here, he spoke about what happened with the Senate budget, and that felt extremely partisan and left us, concerned about the tone and about the direction of the Senate. And then we began our next week with the rejection of Ellen Anderson. And so I think between those two things that we might be best served if we hit the reset button. But then, again, we've got this looming, what is the former staffer going to do with regard to a lawsuit? And so that is also casting a cloud. And it's unfortunate because I think it casts a pall on the entire Senate. And I don't think that it is reflective of what the Minnesotans sent us to St. Paul to do. And I think you go from there to the plethora of constitutional amendments. And I think you would have to question the direction of the leadership right now in the Senate. And so, it's important that we focus on what we are here to do. And what we're here to do is to represent the people that we represent. And we need to look at what's important. We need to be talking about jobs. We need to be talking about what is it going to take to make sure we emerge strong from the greatest recession we've had. We need to be talking about how can we make sure each and every child is ready and prepared to enter post-secondary and beyond and compete. And so with the tenor and tone that's happened at the Senate, it makes it difficult to keep that focus. But that's what I'm focused on. And I will let Representative Thissen speak, but then I would welcome the questions with regard to some of the matters that were discussed previously.
You guys probably just want to go right on to those questions, don't you? Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I'll try to be quick and try to move on what I think actually Minnesotans care more about, which is getting back to work and getting our economy going. The House DFL had a very busy week, and I think a week that stands in stark contrast to what the Republicans have been doing. We started out the week, Ryan Winkler and other members of our caucus had a press conference on reforming the legislature and focusing in on improving what we're doing here. That's a really great place to start with reform, I think, because there's a lot of improvements that we can make and very practical ideas that should get bipartisan support. And on Wednesday, Representative Mahoney and other members of our caucus came forward with some more, and just an additional set of, I think, very good, targeted, practical ideas to get people back to work. And yesterday and today have been out across the state talking with Minnesotans about those ideas. We were in, among other places yesterday in Rochester, had a turnout of well over 100 people at our event there. And, in one of the speakers came up, it was about the convention center and other jobs proposals that we had, and one of the speakers came up who owns a linen company down there, and he said the new convention center will mean a lot more businesses at local hotels, which will mean that his business will do a lot better. So there are legitimate and clear and indisputable job growth benefits from investing in our infrastructure across the state, and not just these statewide infrastructure assets, but also things like civic centers and local community assets. And I think that that's really important to know. In St. Cloud yesterday, we were at the college. We were talking about manufacturing in central Minnesota and the importance of making sure that our job skills of our people match the jobs that are out there, and that a lot of business owners are seeing, as our population ages, they're seeing a huge need for very skilled workers. Things are going to start to turn around in that direction, but we need to make sure that we're doing things that connect people to those jobs. And many of the proposals that Representative Mahoney and others have come out with, including the governor and the Senate with our DFL jobs plan, do exactly that. So I think that stands in stark contrast to what the Republicans were talking about all this week, which is rolling out another series of amendments, right? The voter ID had a lot of high profile yesterday, came out with the anti-labor amendment that the Republicans are talking about, the so-called right to work amendment. It's time to set that aside. And one thing I think is really significant, Speaker Zellers continues to tell Minnesotans, oh, we don't really care about these constitutional amendments. We're focused on jobs. But their words don't match their action. It's time for Speaker Zellers to either stand up and say, we're not going to do constitutional amendments this year. We are really going to focus on jobs, let his words match his actions, or say my caucus is in charge and the right wing of my caucus is in charge, and we're going to move forward with these extreme constitutional amendments, and that's going to be our agenda, and it's going to be Groundhog Day. It's going to be exactly what we did last year that I think has upset so many Minnesotans. So I hope that the Speaker will stop this movement toward running all these constitutional amendments forward and actually focus on jobs. The last thing I think I just want to touch on briefly, and then you can get to your questions. There's a lot of discussion about the business climate. That was kind of the whole theme of the floor debate yesterday. And really I think it's important to note and to think about this. What the Republicans continue to say is the only thing that they care about is getting out of the way of business. They never talk about the people of Minnesota, ever. They never talk about investing in the people of Minnesota. It's just, let's get out of the way of business. We need to do what we can to make sure our businesses are doing well, but I think the way we best do that is actually investing in our people. And I would say, getting out of the way of business is exactly what landed us in this economic situation that we're in. And we have to remind ourselves of that. Getting out of deregulating banking, deregulating the housing market, deregulation is what caused this economic recession. It's a failed policy. They keep trying to say we need to change the way we do things in Minnesota, but changing the way we do things to go back to the really bad policies that didn't work makes no sense. The Republicans are looking backward. We need to be looking forward, getting our people ready for a new economy. That's what the Democrats are focused on, and that's what our state needs to continue to be focused on. Now, you can have at it.
So, Senator, do you feel that the DFL never rejected an appointee for the same reasons that the Republicans did Anderson?
Actually, I would say that. We rejected, if you think back, we rejected Commissioner Yecke, and that was before my time. But I recall when Commissioner Yecke was in that role, I was a parent at Hopkins. I was the co-chair of the parent advocacy group for the Hopkins School District. I remember being at an event and somebody asking the then Commissioner, what can we do to make sure our poorest children come to kindergarten ready to learn? And there's like 200 people in the room, and she looked at us and she said, those mothers need to stay home. That's what we can do. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, and she's leading our education charge, and I went to her and questioned her, and I said, I know those poor women don't have that choice, so is that a fair statement? And I actually wrote a letter to the Star Tribune about that, and later saw that she was rejected, and so I wasn't surprised. And then remember, we picked Alice Segrin. And that's who the governor put forward, but she was a Republican legislator, and we all, think very highly of her, and that became the choice.
Before you go on to the next one, on that one, isn't it conceivable that there are other people who think mothers should stay home, so a Republican could say that's an extreme, that you're considering her extreme and she isn't?
So let's talk about, should mothers stay home? I was so fortunate. I had a 20-year career in business, and when my children were teenagers, I had the luxury of making that choice because I thought that actually that was what was needed at my house. I had kids that I felt like that was going to be the best way to make sure they stayed on track through their teenage years, but I had that luxury. My point isn't that women should or shouldn't stay home. My point is that for many women, it's an economic necessity.
But isn't that a valid opinion that some may have, that a woman should stay home?
Well, no, not to me.
Senator, would you comment on GOP leader Senjum saying that they have a watch list of other commissioners in the governor's office?
Well, Pat, I think that's an unfortunate use of words because then it does sound like we are setting up a situation of enemies and friends. And so the very notion of a watch list is like, okay, we're in charge and we're watching you. And I think that's the very tone that I work every day here to avoid, so that instead we are here to govern together in concert, representing the people of Minnesota. And so I don't think that tone sets the stage for that to happen.
Are you suggesting that this is like an enemies list, using that word?
Well, some could perceive it as that. I'm going to give Senator Senjum the benefit of the doubt and think that he didn't mean it as such.
Senator Bonoff, has your caucus been apprised of why Michael Brodkorb was let go?
I've read in the newspaper what you've read in the newspaper. We haven't had that discussion, and I think with regard to the question you asked Senator Senjum about if, in fact, he knew whether or not there was a contract with the law firm, I was disappointed to hear Senator Senjum's answers. I was a vice president general manager of a division in a public company, and I would have known if my person responsible for legal matters had signed a contract if my company was being sued. And so that was a troubling answer. I think that we have a rules committee to make sure that matters of the Senate are looked at beyond party. I mean, this is about the Senate. The Senate is perhaps being sued, not the, as far as, I haven't seen the action, so I don't know if this, if Michael Brodkorb is suing the Republican caucus or the Senate.
We're not included.
There's no lawsuit yet. I mean, there's just a concern that the lawsuit could arise and they hired a Senate. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, what do you want from the Republicans at this point to do?
I want the Republicans to bring these matters to the Rules Committee so that matters that affect the Senate are dealt with in the Rules Committee.
So you were not apprised, you were not included on any of these discussions. This happened without
Correct.
your knowledge or participation.
Correct. I believe, though, Senator Bach was told that this was coming, that he was not consulted about hiring a law firm nor making any financial commitments on behalf of the Senate. And I think that's another important thing to remember in all of this, is that we are just coming off hearing that the Senate Democrats are being expected to cut a certain amount of our staff, and then come to find out that we've made a financial commitment to a law firm. Where does that leave our budget? What is our plan with regard to that?
To be clear, Bach was told that a legal action might be coming, but was not told that or apprised in any way that the law firm had been engaged or hired.
Correct.
Senator, should they make all of this information public at this point?
Well, you asked the question, should they make all of this? Some of it, I'm sure, is subject to attorney-client privilege, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer that. What I would say is anything that isn't subject to those kinds of legal restrictions ought to be public.
Mr. Leader, you're a lawyer. Do you have a thought on whether or not that should be public?
I'm not representing anybody in this litigation.
You might be the best person to issue an opinion.
I don't have any opinion on that.
Isn't it the fact that attorney-client privilege is basically attorney-client privilege unless the client says, make it public?
Again, I'm not a lawyer, so it sounds like Representative Thissen is suggesting that.
Certainly the client could waive the privilege, but there's a lot of consequences that go with that. Such as? You waive a lot of privilege. You can't just selectively waive your privilege. And that's as far as I'm going.
Do you think it's in the public interest to have the Senate do that? Do you think it's in the public interest to have the Senate do that?
I don't really know that much about this whole thing. It's the Senate, and I'm paying attention to getting people back to work in Minnesota.
Senator, do you think that everything possible should be made public?
Yes, I think everything possible should be made public. And again, going back to what Representative Thissen said, that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that the Senate waive their rights. I have no idea. I haven't seen the matter. I haven't heard what the actual charges are. I'm suggesting that these things could be decided best if they were decided together in the Rules Committee. That's what I'm advocating.
So is that a pledge for you that if the DFL does take over the Senate next year, that any personnel matters that involve legal issues will be public?
It's a pledge that should the Senate take over the majority, and Rachel, that's my intention, okay? But should that happen, that we would bring matters to the Rules Committee. And Rules Committee meetings are public, so, But I think it's really important that we, again, rise above this isn't about the Republican Party. And let's, for a minute, move from that conversation to the constitutional amendments. The constitutional amendments are really an attempt to take the Republican platform and put it into our Constitution. And that isn't the role of what we're here in St. Paul to do. We ought to be governing. And when you use the Constitution, you're going around the administrative branch. You don't get the best product because you can't work together to come to compromise. So, for example, this photo ID, we ought to be working on that language. Republicans and Democrats rolling up our sleeves, figuring out how we can come up with something that meets the objectives of both sides. That's what we're here to do. That's what I like to do. I actually find that, that's a challenge worth doing. If you can work with somebody on this side, somebody on that side, coming together, and then coming to an agreement that the governor can sign, now you've really done something.
So does that mean if the DFL takes over the Senate, that you wouldn't put forward any constitutional amendments? The same question to you, Mr. Current Minority Leader.
Sure.
Constitutional amendments if you take over the House? Is that a bad idea, period?
I think constitutional amendments that are going to do things that you should be doing in statute are, if you have to remove the office of the treasurer, which is in the Constitution, that's a different matter. But I think the larger point right now is that we are dealing with the fallout of a serious economic crisis. I think there's a situational aspect to this as well. And people continue, although the economy is improving, people continue to be out of work, property taxes to continue to go up. We have more important things we ought to be focusing on than these constitutional amendments. And I would say, if you look across the state at the editorial boards, conservative areas, liberal areas, unanimously have been coming out about all of these constitutional amendments. And I think that reflects something about where the people of Minnesota are. They want us paying attention to the jobs and the economy issues and not these other items, and that's why we need to move forward.
Some in your caucus have said that they wouldn't mind seeing a vote on the amendment talked about yesterday simply to get folks on the other side on record. You've said that you don't see a single vote on your side for that union amendment. You're saying you don't even want to see it get to a vote?
I don't think there's any reason that we need to get to a vote on any of these constitutional amendments.
And I would agree. I'm sorry, back to Rachel's question. The one thing I would add, Senator Bach has a proposed amendment that says two-thirds majority should be required before it goes to the Constitution. And I think if you did that, in fact, you would solve some of this problem, because then both sides, unless you had a supermajority, would in fact have to come to an agreement before it goes to the ballot. And I think at least then what you'd find on the ballot would be a reflection of what most people wanted rather than what's going to the ballot now, which keeps our, as Representative Thissen said, takes our eye off what's important.
Well, Senator, on the constitutional amendments just generally, because what you said is that Republicans are using these amendments to put their platform in the Constitution, or trying to do that. You got major issues like should marriage be only between a man and a woman? Should people have to present photo ID at the polls, and should they be allowed not to join a union in unionized industries? Those are fairly clear issues. The other side will argue. What is the problem with letting Minnesotans decide directly rather than the politics that occur in this building?
Well, I think, look at California. Is that who we want to be, that we legislate by our Constitution? Isn't that an abdication of what they sent here to do? If the people don't like the votes I take, then I trust they won't vote for me in November. That, we are there to represent the people of our district, and so I don't think we ought to be using our Constitution for that. I think we ought to do our job as legislators.
Mr. Leader, it sounded like earlier you were saying that legislature can't do both the jobs issues and constitutional amendments. Even in a short session, why not?
Well, I think it was proven last year that that the legislature was unable to do that. The focus was so much on those constitutional amendments, we didn't even get a budget balance. So I think right now we should be focusing on getting people back to work. There's a lot of really, really good ideas that are on the table. I think we have 11 specific ideas right now that I think many of should get bipartisan support. We have a bonding bill we should be talking about. That's where our energy should be focused.
And I have good news. to talk about, which hasn't gotten much press, but the Sunset Commission completed its work. First ever Sunset Commission. I was the vice chair of that and served with Representative Kiffmeyer. There were 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. We worked very hard. We reviewed all these, health licensing boards, councils, commissions. After that, we came forward with recommendations that received consensus, and we put forward a report. And so I think there is an example of when government works, it can work, and I think you'll see in the recommendations we put forward some changes will take place that will be really good for the state of Minnesota and will serve those councils well.
So how much money are you going to be able to save?
We don't know yet what the result will be. For example, right now, the councils many of them do their own administrative function. We put forward a recommendation that those councils now be served through the SMART program in admin. That will be some efficiencies. That will save some money. I think we won't know how to quantify until we've got some time to implement.
We preview the caucuses just a little bit from your perspective on the
I
Democratic.
supporting President Obama.
Very good. Thank you. We'll force you on that, Mr. Baker. Well, on your side, obviously, there isn't much dispute, but or at least only minor disputes. But on the Republican side, can you, as Democrats, kind of take apart for us what message does it send if Romney prevails next Tuesday, or if Gingrich, or if Ron Paul, or if Rick Santorum, or ad infinitum? Kind of go down the list of the major ones as you see what kind of signals it might send.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, at the end of the day, I think what I would say is, and I haven't watched, honestly, all the debates and that stuff on the Republican side, but the discussion that's going on at the national level in the presidential race is exactly the discussion that's going on right here. I think, the President Obama is talking about getting people back to work. He's talking about middle-class families and strengthening a middle-class economy. Perhaps the most important thing that came out of the last couple of weeks to me was former Governor Romney's tax returns coming out, showing he's paying under 15%. It just kind of shows the stark differences between what the Democrats are standing up and fighting for and who the Republicans are standing up and fighting for, which is, from my perspective, big corporations and special interests. And that inequality issue that underlies that, I think, is something that's going to be significant in the presidential race, regardless of who the Republican nominee is, and in the state races here in Minnesota.
I'll just pick up a couple of names. Would it send a different message if Romney prevails in the caucuses on Tuesday, or versus Newt Gingrich? From your folks.
I don't know.
I don't know about the message. I think if you've got Gingrich at the top of the ticket, then you've got a campaign that's about ethics. And I think that would be a painful and ugly campaign. If you've got Romney at the top of the ticket, I think then you have a campaign that's about economic disparity. And perhaps if you have Romney at the top of the ticket, that will be the impetus to actually do tax reform. I mean, it's not okay that when you're the super wealthy that you take advantage of all of those, 15% capital gains and in dividend income tax breaks, and literally are just walking around the tax structure that most, literally, 99.9% of Americans are using.
But didn't you vote against the plans to raise the income tax?
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about tax reform. So, for example, we have our capital gains and dividend income taxed at ordinary income in Minnesota. So you can't, no matter how wealthy you are, you can't get around that. At the federal government level, they have 15%, as you know, for the income where if you're that wealthy that you're not getting a paycheck, you're just living off your investments, you're only paying 50%. That in itself doesn't work. So
you support changes to the capital gains, but you don't support higher income taxes on top of it.
I don't support using the income tax as the only, primary strongest tool in the Minnesota tax system. I am for tax reform that broadens the base of the sales tax to take the volatility out of our income streams. And, I've been saying that since I got elected. I remember talking to the editorial board in 2005 saying I was for that. And now, actually, I think Commissioner Franz has been going around the state and talking to people about doing just that, and there is some real interest in it. So I don't think it's fair to characterize my position as being against raising taxes. I'm for modernizing our tax structure.
I was against it. I said didn't you vote against?
Yeah, I did. Yep. Thanks. Who thought we were going to get into a tax policy debate?
Not me.
Okay, thanks.